Hello everyone, I hope you're well. Today I've brought you back to the fantastic Upper Eskdale, and more specifically the Hardknott Roman Fort. Now this is a place that for a lot of photographers who drive over the Hardknott Pass, which connects Eskdale and Langdale, I don't know whether it's avoided or people just don't know it's here, but this is an absolutely brilliant place to come and photograph. Lots of intricate patterns with these walls, and also you get a fantastic view behind me looking straight across the Irish Sea. On a really clear day you can actually see the Isle of Man from here. The focus of today's video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about shooting straight into the sun, because this is a really great place to come and sort of sharpen those skills, because you can see behind me that big white disc has actually made an appearance today. This is a really good sunset place, so I've already got a shot picked out because I've been here many times before, and I'm pretty sure on the shot that I want to take. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we can handle these files in post and overcome some of the issues that are attached to shooting into the sun. Right, I've got you on the selfie stick today. A very kind gentleman left me some lovely constructive criticism on the last video, saying I was getting a little bit too close to the camera when I was doing some of those talky bits. I'm still getting to grips with this little Pocket 2, and sometimes you can get a little bit too close to it. So yeah, a bit further out. Hopefully I'm not in your face too much. This shot, I'm going to try and get it in the bag quite quickly, because looking out across the sea at the minute, it's quite hazy, and because the cloud height is relatively low, it's one of those where this sun could get snuffed out quite quickly. So as I say, I'm going to get the shot, and then, you know, it's in the bag and I don't have to worry about it. Typically I've come up here to shoot the view across to the Irish Sea, but the view behind me looking to the Scawfells, I've got some really nice moody cloud drifting over, so I might grab a quick long lens shot of that while I'm here, because, you know, it'd be rude not to. But yeah, I'm going to get set up and get this shot in the bag, I think. Okay, so hopefully this wind isn't interfering the sound too much here. I do apologise if it is. In terms of this shot, first and foremost, we need to make sure that the flare is controlled. So I'm shooting a series of images as a bracket, just straight into the sun, no filters, nothing, letting the flare do what it needs to, and then a second series of bracketed images with my hand over the sun that's going to block out the flare. And then when we get these back in post, I'll be able to blend them together and we'll get a nicely controlled balanced image, yet shooting straight into the sun. And yeah, hopefully we'll get a good result from this. The composition itself, you've got this lovely sweep of the wall leading you down towards the valley below, and then on to the setting sun and across to the Irish Sea in the distance there. It's a little bit hazy tonight, so you can't quite see the Isle of Man, but it's still a absolutely cracking view, this one. F11, bog standard sort of landscape, just focusing a third into the scene. There's no real need to focus stack this, because even though my foreground subject's very close to the lens, the fells in the distance are in deep shadow. You can't really see any detail in them at all, so there's no real point in doing any sort of focus stacking here. F11, couple of series of bracketed images, and yeah, hopefully this one will work pretty well. I've already took these shots ahead of time because, as I was saying earlier, the sun's a little bit sort of hit and miss at the minute with the clouds, so we've got those in the bag. I'm gonna head back to the PC because I'm absolutely freezing here, and let's do a bit of post-processing. Right, back at the ranch, my hands have warmed up a little bit. It was absolutely freezing out there, really biting cold wind, and a little bit of a nightmare to sort of keep the noise off the camera. I do apologise if it was getting a little bit noisy there. Just a couple of things before I start. The first thing is, I do apologise for the colour looking a little bit iffy. Certainly on that first piece to camera that I did where I was stood a little bit away, I'd rather stupidly left the white balance in incandescent mode from something I'd done a couple of days ago and I forgot to change it back. So it turns out trying to correct white balance in Premiere Pro, if you've set it miles off, it's absolute nightmare. I was really struggling to get this to look anything like natural, so I do apologise for that. Second thing is, before I get into the edit, I just want to make clear that, you know, shooting into the sun isn't for everyone, and I can totally understand why some people avoid it. I'm certainly not trying to make anyone feel like less of a photographer if you don't do it. All I'm trying to do here is just to give you a couple of pointers, so if you do feel like shooting into the sun in future, you can get the data while you're out in the field, and then you've always got the option to bring it back into post and you can have a little play around. And if nothing else, it's a good opportunity to sort of develop your post-processing skills. But without further ado, let's get over to the PC and let's have a look at these files. Okay folks, so we've got our files here in Lightroom, and you can see on the screen that this first image, this has been exposed for the sky. So anything below the sort of ridge line, I'm not really interested in. You can see on the right hand side that I've actually increased the exposure by about 3 stops. Now that seems pretty drastic, but let me explain. If I return this to the starting point, you can see that this is very dark, but this file here has got the maximum amount of highlight detail in it, and that's why I'm wanting to use this one. So if I just pull the exposure up back to where it was, you can see in the darker areas of the frame, we're not really suffering from any noise here, so there's no real issue with using this frame. All I'm after is getting this frame to a point where it looks pretty accurate for what I saw out in the field, and this here is pretty much bang on. The key here when you're doing any kind of editing with shooting into the sun is you need to make sure that the file you're using that's exposed for the sky has a really nice soft transition between the really bright area, which is obviously the sun, that's a pure white, and then radiating out into the rest of the sky. What you don't want to do is bring the highlights down too far. If you sort of start doing this, you can see that you get this almost fried egg look, which is, you know, really not what we want here. So we're going to leave that as it was and have a look at this next frame. Now this one was part of the same bracketed series of images. This one's exposed for the foreground, so we've got all this nice shadow detail retained here in the immediate foreground. You can see in the middle distance that we've got this big blob of lens flare. Now I'm going to address that in Photoshop in a moment. The third image, this was part of a different series of brackets, and you can see that my hand is in the frame here, and what that's doing is it's just blocking out the lens flare. So you can see now in the center that we haven't got any flare. The first thing we need to do is to bring these over to Photoshop as layers. So if I just shift and then highlight these 3 frames, hit edit, well, right click and then edit in, and then open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, so we have our 3 files loaded into Photoshop as layers. Now the first thing I need to do is make sure that these layers are aligned. So if I hold shift and select the layers and just go to edit, auto align layers, and then just hit OK on that. And what that's going to do is just make sure that the layers are aligned and we didn't get any movement between the frames. So before I go any further, I should just make clear that anytime I do any kind of exposure blending, normally I'll use luminosity masks. There's several different programs out there. They all do a very good job. I use Lumenzia, but as I say, they'll all pretty much do the same thing. For the purposes of this video though, because a lot of the people who are watching this won't have access to those plugins, I'm going to do this exposure blend just using basic layer masks. I've done this many times in the past and it'll work just fine for this image. So the first thing I need to do is bring through the brighter layer that's underneath, that was exposed for the foreground, through this top layer which was exposed for the sky. So I'm going to grab a new layer mask here on the bottom right hand corner, and then to bring through that brighter layer underneath, I'm going to select the gradient tool on the left hand side, and with black as the foreground color selected, what I'm going to do is just drag up from the bottom to the top and get a nice smooth transition on this mask. So what's going to happen is that everything on the bottom half of this frame is going to be masked out. So if I just start here and just drag up very slowly up to about there and let go. And you can see there that that's done a pretty good job straight away of getting us a nice blend. If you hit the backslash key, you can actually see everything that's red has been masked out, and you can see that everything above that red area is still remaining, which is the sky. Now, because this mask I've just done quite sort of generally, and I've just done it by eye, it's not perfect. And the left and right hand sides of the frame, you've got slightly darkened hillsides, and in reality they were a little bit brighter than that. There's an easy way to get round that. If I just select the brush tool and keep in black as my foreground colour, if I set the flow to 6%, which is very low, and I'll just make my brush a bit bigger. And again, if I just swipe across this area using black, it's going to mask out these darker areas. So if I just very softly just mask those out there, and you can see now this is really starting to look pretty good. So if I just click before and after, you can see that we've got this lovely soft transition between foreground and sky. Now again, at this point I could pretty much stop and have a very balanced image here, but we do have this issue in the center of the frame of the flare. Now you'll remember that we do have a third frame here, which is this one, where I've got my thumb over the sun and it's blocking the flare, so you can see with no flare in this frame. So the plan here is just to do the same thing as we did before, using a layer mask and just getting rid of this bit of flare. First and foremost, I'm going to merge these two layers together because I don't really need 3 layers now. I've got my sky and my foreground nicely balanced as this top layer, and then underneath I've got my layer with no flare. And all I'm going to do again is just grab another layer mask, black brush selected with low flow. Just going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and then I'm just going to very slowly just brush out that area of flare. We've also got a little bit of flare just in this foreground here, just below the wall. If I just brush that out as well. And there you have it. That's pretty much job done. I mean, I could spend a little bit more time here finessing this and just getting the exposure a bit more on the money. I'll just brush over these areas again, but you can see how just by using a couple of very basic layer masks, we've got a really balanced exposure here and a really nice smooth transition between foreground and sky. It doesn't look in any way unnatural. It doesn't have that sort of HDR look that you get where you sort of merge 3-4 files together and it spits out one high dynamic range file to work with. We've got a much more natural result here, and it's only taken maybe 5-10 minutes to do. Now at this point I've got essentially a raw file to work with here that's perfectly exposed. What I would now do from this point on is just go through the normal processing steps in terms of adjusting color tone and brightness and contrast, and effectively finish up with a really nice finished image. I'll show you that one on the screen here. So you can see that I've not really had to do an awful lot with this file, but bar a bit of contrast adjustment and a bit of light dodging and burning on the foreground, it's really not had an awful lot done to it. There's so much natural contrast in this scene that it really just needed a little bit of minor tweaking. I haven't added actually any saturation or vibrance into this picture. It would really start to look a bit garish if I did that. But if we do a quick before and after on the two images, on the right hand side is the image that we were just editing in Photoshop, and then on the left hand side is the final version. And bar a bit of a contrast lift in certain areas, it's really not needed an awful lot done to it. But This goes to show that just by using basic layer masks, you don't have to even use luminosity masks, but just using basic layer masks, using the right technique out in the field in terms of bracketing your images, and also using that trick of sticking your hand or your thumb over the sun to block the flare, you can get a really nice natural result in quite a short amount of time. I'm going to leave this one here because I think I've covered everything that I wanted to, but keep liking and subscribing, and also don't forget to sign up to the newsletter. I mentioned this on the last video, but I've had quite a lot of entries already into the Edit My Raw thing, some really great entries already, so I'm looking forward to doing the judging on that later in the month. But yeah, keep liking and subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next one.